Thank you to everyone online joining us live from your place to ours. Plant Protein, the President and CEO, Organic Garage. Tony Morello, CEO, Zoglows Incredible Food Corps. Monica Ruffo, founder and CEO, Well Told. And Gus Klemos, co-founder and chief baking officer, Unbun. I think this is the first baking officer we've had. And of course, Mike Wilkes, director, global sales and business development at Enwave and podcast host of Food for Thought, is our guest moderator, and this makes up today's lineup. Our objective in running this plant protein series is threefold. First, for companies to gain visibility and traction on an accessible platform. The second, to inform capital markets players and investors about these types of companies in the space, and also providing new knowledge of what is happening in the plant area. Thirdly, and this is to bring it home, from the science of protein in the first session through the company pitch presentations, you as the investor or as the passerby will hopefully have gathered all this information to see a culmination in this week's finale. For you, the attendees, we ask that you share your ideas and feedbacks to our presenters, maybe some leads, possible funding after due diligence, referrals, etc. You can find their contact information in their profile box to the right. We will refrain from giving management advice. Some housekeeping matters: if you're having trouble with connecting, try refreshing. Worst case scenario, call IT. Our disclaimer: this presentation is for information purposes only and not a solicitation to make investment in either shares or debt or to buy and sell stock. Now, there are no formal presentations, and I'm sorry we started a little bit late, so I'm just going to rush through this part. Mike Wilkes, bio. He's an experienced business development professional with intricate knowledge of food system and CPG space. Having helped scale the large meal kit provider in Canada from startup to commercialization, and having launched his own product in the CPG space, he is well versed to speak on the topic of product development and food innovation. Mike, as I said, currently hosts Enwave's Food for Thought podcast. For our audience, before I forget, if you have questions, use the question box or the chat box. We like questions, and these people have answers. Without further ado, I turn it over to Mike.
Thank you, Barrington. It's a pleasure to be here today with Tony, Matt, Gus, and Monica. So as you mentioned, our goal of this fireside chat is to take a look at how plant-based protein companies are making adaptive products and encouraging consumer adoption. So there's three themes that I want the panel to touch on today. One being the role of plant-based protein in a post-COVID era. I think what's happened over the last year has probably accelerated the adoption of plant-based style of eating, somewhere in the range of 5 to 10 years, and would love to get some more insights from the panel on that. The secondly being the product development mindset. So there's a few different mentalities and ways that companies approach this. One being more of a macro level approach versus a bottom-up approach, or if you want to look at it as a push strategy, pushing products towards consumers, sort of telling them what they want and what they like, versus a pull strategy of understanding what is the consumer wanting from these manufacturing companies and the products, and pulling it towards them. And then lastly, where are we at in the adoption curve? So maybe to start, Monica, if you want to start, just briefly, each of the panelists, if you can just, what is the fundamental problem that your business is trying to solve? I think that will help frame the conversation for all in attendance.
Great, thank you. Well, it's interesting because the title is Plant Protein, and we're actually a functional wellness company, plant-based. And the problem that we solve is one that I discovered when I was going through breast cancer treatment. And that is that completely clean plant-based supplements and remedies don't exist on the market. I mean, they do now because we introduced them. But the very products, the wellness products that people are buying thinking are they're going to make them healthier, are often full of synthetics. They're very often animal-based. People don't even realize it. They can't really read the labels. And so we are the solution to that. We're completely plant-based. Our products are made with nothing but organic plants. We have no synthetics, no fillers, and our products are extremely efficacious. So we have products like for sleep, stress relief, etc.
Great. Matt, do you want to tell us a little bit more about Organic Garage?
Yeah, I mean, Organic Garage was established to answer the fundamental problem of, can people buy organic and natural products and afford them every day versus, select group of the demographic populace that was catered to previously. And in addition to that, I mean, we're getting into the CPG space and answering the fundamental problem of how do small brands get to market and get scale. It's something that we see time and time again with brands that approach us for listings. So we've recently acquired a plant-based cheese company that we're launching into the market to help answer, like I said, how do you get these brands to market? So, yeah.
Great. Gus, do you want to tell us about Unbun?
There we go. Sorry, just unmuting. Yeah, so Unbun is a grain-free, keto-friendly bakery company. We do have plant-based products, but really we like to think of ourselves as, agnostic in terms of what is the best way to eat. What we do know and what we're focused on is having people control their blood sugar whenever they have their favorite food. So whether that's a sandwich or pizza or tacos, you need to have a carrier. Those carriers traditionally are a source of carbohydrates, wheat, gluten, chemical binders. And so we want to provide the cleanest carrier or vehicle in a way that it's not allowing anyone to compromise on their traditional flavors, textures, and tastes. And so, we call ourselves a healthy carrier business or a healthy vehicle. And I started the business, I guess, 3 years ago. We've grown from a dozen doors to over 3,000 during that time, and from 1 to 12 SKUs. And it's nice to see Matt Lurie on this panel, because Organic Garage helped us out quite a bit early on and gave us a chance and listed our products. So thank you for the opportunity.
Tony, and last but certainly not least, can you introduce us to Zoglows?
Thank you. Yeah, absolutely. Zoglows is a wonderful business that's been around for well over 25 years doing plant-based. The mother business, if you will, is in Israel. They are a meat production plant, actually been around since 1937. But for the last 25 years, they've been producing plant-based products. I like to think of it as the opportunity for us to take some of the best practices that already exist in that part of the world and bring them into Canada and throughout the U.S. To bring some of those best practices and make these products available to the mainstream consumer. And I keep hearing affordability. That's a key piece of what we are all about, is how do we make this affordable to everyone. As we all know, whether it be organics, whether it be plant-based products, most consumers say they want to buy organic, they want to buy plant-based, they want to buy gluten-free, but quite often it comes with a premium that they're not willing to pay for. So, how do we make that gap a lot closer? And I think Matt's a great example of how they've narrowed that gap to a point where it's accessible to a lot more people. And our intention is to take plant-based and narrow that gap to make it affordable to everyone.
That's great. Thank you, Tony. So let's start off. Gus, I want to come back to you in terms of your view on minimum viable product versus getting a perfect product into the market to compete from day one. So, with your suite of products, what did that look like of the original idea versus where you're at now? You've obviously come a long way in 3 years, but maybe just walk us through that journey of what your mentality was from day one.
Yeah, and so originally when I started this kind of venture, and I don't know if it applies to a lot of other entrepreneurs, but it was really, I was eating out in downtown Toronto all the time. And, regardless of how you choose to eat, I think everyone can agree that if you want your pants to fit a little bit better, you cut bread out. And if, you're not really concerned, then you eat as much bread as you want. And so I was going out having burgers on a lettuce bun, and it was really that solving that initial problem for myself from where this business was born. It was, how do I make the healthiest kind of bun that I can make for burgers? And then I kind of delved into, being an entrepreneur. How big is the bun market? Okay, well, it's a $2 billion industry in the US. Okay, so let's say 2.2 between Canada and the US. I want to make something that's gluten-free, but also low in carbs. And so really honed in on that one SKU, because I was more interested in the food service, because I was eating out more often, and not necessarily, if you're eating at home, almost 80% of bread that's purchased in a grocery store is sliced bread. So when you talk about SKU and product selection, that minimum viable product for me was, and selfishly, how do I get these buns into my favorite burger chains? And looking at Beyond as a company, or Impossible, looking to emulate those types of businesses as a CPG, they were very much focused in the food service first, where that QSR or chain really acts as your marketing engine to drive turns in retail. So I think I'm definitely a proponent of your minimum viable product, and ultimately, we can talk about trends and everything else. Food has to be good. Food has to taste delicious. So if you can make food that is delicious, you'll be successful. If you can make food that's delicious and a reasonable price, you'll be very successful. And so, when we take that and then start looking at the health benefits, as well as finding a hole in the market that we were able to fill, it was kind of like the perfect storm. Subsequently, we were really focused on just doing one SKU. We started out as Unbun, right? So it wasn't like, okay, we're going to make pizza crusts and baguettes and tortillas and everything else. And it was really, the SKU extensions came as almost commissioned by our customers. Because ultimately, we're a bakery company. If you want baguettes, if you want bagels, whatever you want, we'll bake them for you. But that minimum kind of viable product, I think, has to pass the, is it delicious? And is it also solving a problem and kind of, filling a gap in the market? And I think that you'll find success there.
Tony, I want to throw it over to you. Has what's happened with COVID and a move away from food service and that being displaced with retail, has that informed your product development process at all in terms of going after how a restaurant wants to maybe consume or prepare products versus consumers at home?
Well, absolutely. I believe that COVID has forced people to stay home and prepare a lot of their own meals when they're not ordering in, but more people are cooking at home, no doubt about it. So, how do you take some of the traditional plant-based products that have been out there that have been that heat and serve technology, now bring products that can be suitable substitutions to creating an actual meal. So I like to refer to it as taking it from the toaster oven, where we may have been in the last 25 years with a lot of the traditional nuggets and what have you, and taking it to the cooktop, where now you can make your own plant-based chili or fajitas or whatever the case might be. And everyone's improving their products at a very rapid rate right now. So I think everyone's getting close to actually having products that taste like the real thing, which is really kind of cool to see. And I think over time, like I said, pricing is going to get in line as well. And now it becomes a viable option for a consumer at the shelf to make a choice between, do I want meat or do I want an alternative to meat, and get a similar experience. And that's really where we see the big change coming out of COVID, is just that meal preparation at home idea.
Yeah, that's great insight. Matt, from the retail side, what have you seen in terms of food manufacturers that might have been much more focused on food service, different case sizes, pack sizes, how consumers were going to, that wasn't ultimately going to be how the product was presented to the consumer? I'm assuming that a lot of those companies have now pivoted and are knocking on your door saying, hey, we want to get into your store shelves. What has that experience been like for you?
Yeah, I wouldn't necessarily say that there's been a change from companies who were focused on food service now switching to retail. I think, Gus can probably attest to this, and probably also Tony, that any good probably CPG company that has a retail viable product also has a corresponding food service option. And, those are two channels that you kind of want to pursue, hopefully, in similar timeframes, because it's different revenue channels. So I haven't really seen a change with that per se. I mean, I just want to touch on the note about the minimum viable product versus, the perfect product to market. And as a retailer, I would never want to see a brand rush a product to market to get it on shelf and then have to go back and reformulate. I think the thing that I've seen time and time again is maybe smaller brands who couldn't invest in proper branding companies and have to redo their packaging at some point. But you never want to rush a product to market and have to reformulate. You want your best product on shelf, so the customer who tries it the first time gets your best always. So I think that is very important.
Monica, what does this look like from the supplement nutraceutical side of things, where I'm not sure if there's more regulatory hurdles that you might have to contend with?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's interesting because Gus was saying before, like from a food perspective, it has to taste good. From a supplement perspective, it has to work and it has to be safe. And I completely agree. Like in our case, we would never go to market with something that isn't 100%. And there are a lot of regulatory hoops to jump through, especially in Canada. We were about 3 years before pre-revenue developing our formulation. So for us, the minimum viable product was more a matter of only launching with a certain number of SKUs that we knew there was quite a bit of demand for. And over time, expanding our number of SKUs rather than doing something that was more like a minimum viable product. Because it's really not possible, I don't think, in the supplement business. Mind you, in the US, the FDA has a lot less regulation, so potentially that would be doable, but certainly not in Canada. So we put our best foot forward. We did, originally we were going to go only direct to consumer. We got a lot of retail demand, so we ended up being an omni-channel brand. But we really did do it with a view to have customers repeat immediately. So their first experience with the brand, even if it was when we launched 2.5 years ago, to what they're getting today is the highest possible experience we can provide them with.
One thing that the panelists we spoke about prior to going on air was affordability. And one thing I learned from a conference that I attended earlier this year, a virtual alt dairy conference, was the notion that there's only so much of the population able to afford, 100 to 300% premium for a plant-based product. And right now, many of those premium consumers have already been picked up and converted. And so the next wave of adoption in plant-based foods, economics are going to play a much bigger role, having to compete on price parity than simply the notion of wanting to eat plant-based or the novelty or the brand around that. So Gus, as a food manufacturer, what is it the government's role to provide proper incentives? Is it what needs to be done to help companies like yours to be able to compete with their animal-based counterparts?
So I guess the one distinction here is that, we provide and we produce rather plant-based products, but we also produce products that have, cheese and meat on them as well. So what I would suggest is ultimately I believe in the free market, and I think that the government should provide subsidies around, job creation, for example. So I think a path to price parity is, vertical integration, investing in manufacturing. A lot of the brands that you see on shelf, it's a brand that then has a co-packer that then, there's a lot of kind of steps from the time that, a brand creates a product to when you see it on shelf. So I would suggest that that can also reduce cost of goods. But I think that the subsidies, and I'm not educated enough on what the subsidies are for, someone selling burgers, for example. But those are the areas that I could see government helping out. And so I think vertical integration and sponsorship and support through manufacturing, that also creates good jobs. And being able to help with raw materials, local raw material subsidies potentially.
Tony, do you want to chime in terms of how Zoglows has approached vertical integration and scaling up so you bring your unit cost down and being able to compete on price?
Yeah, it's a pick up on what Gus said. We want to start domestic production, and that's going to be the major difference for us, and how the government is going to hopefully support what we're trying to do and help us get there maybe a little faster with maybe some subsidies or whatever the case might be, because it will be job creation. And in all that too, I think we got to add in sustainability and how this can support the future of our planet as well, and the contribution that it can make. So yeah, our goal is to we own the intellectual property, we own the brand globally, the Zoglows brand, and we're hoping that very quickly, hopefully by this fall, we'll have domestic production that we'll have in place here in Canada that can support our country, right?
Matt, what do you see from the retail perspective, and maybe piggybacking on that a little bit of the steps that consumers can take to empower themselves when they're making these purchasing decisions? When I can't think of a time when we had more options in the CPG space. How do you approach that with Organic Garage?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, touching on just the issue of affordability, I mean, that's the whole basis of Organic Garage, is to bridge that gap between what conventional grocers are selling and what organic and all natural items were being sold for, and shortening that distance in price. Because I've always said, whether it's the meat industry, the dairy industry, you're talking about industries that are heavily subsidized to get the price to where it is currently. And actually in the organic and all natural industry, it's one of the few segments of the grocery space that you're paying a more realistic true cost. So if you were to compare, let's say, just organic milk to its plant-based alternative, that gap is much closer than conventional. And if you were to compare certified organic beef or chicken or pork to its plant-based alternative, that gap is much closer. The conventional side and mass farming, and with the subsidies involved and the lobbyists and all those things that go in, it all trickles down to price. But I've always said, paying $1 a pound for ground beef, that is not sustainable. That is not the true cost. And there's very few people who are making a living off of that, whether it be the farmer, even the retailer. It's not sustainable. It's a mass farming kind of mandate that is not good for the future. So paying a truer cost, and when you rip out the subsidies, that gap between what a plant-based alternative is and its, let's just say, non-plant-based alternate is much closer than what you think, and in some cases could potentially even be cheaper. And forget about all the environmental kind of sustainability aspects, which are like over the top compared to its non-plant-based alternatives. So you get an ethical kind of component, and you get a what I believe is a financial component that's becoming much closer as these companies get larger. And also, if you look at the true cost, it's much closer than what you think.
Yeah, that's really interesting insight, and something that I think are conversations that need to more be happening around dinner tables and whatnot. Monica, what do you see on your side of the business, where a food manufacturer has a lot of different options when it comes to bringing manufacturing in-house versus using contract manufacturing? With your products, are those available, or how have you approached scaling and automation and being able to compete in the market?
So for us, I mean, our pricing strategy is very much to be a median price. So we compete against a lot of synthetic supplements that are sold for a lot cheaper. And we had a bit of a choice. Do we go, on a higher end of pricing? Do we go in the middle? And so, we really want to make high quality wellness products available to everybody, not just to the wealthy few. So we went in with a more average type price, offering a lot like super high end product at a median price. That does create some strain because we do work with a co-packer. So we source all of our ingredients ourselves. We verify we own all our formulations, et cetera, but we do work with a co-packer because for now we're able to do that. It enables us also to scale. We're a very young company, so we're barely over 2 years old. And so for now, given the financing we had, that was the most viable option. Whether that is going to be the option moving forward will very much depend on how much financing we can do. But there is room for us to grow within the model we currently have. So that's the way we decided to go forward in order to enable us to get to a point where we have enough volume to even sort of entertain that type of a decision.
Matt, I want to switch gears to product categories. So we've seen a lot of progress in the meat analog space. We've seen a lot of progress in the plant-based milk space. I'd say the cheese space, they still haven't necessarily, there's still some work to be done there. What is the next product category that you think, has a lot of disruption or a lot of work to do on the plant-based side in terms of whether that's competing from a taste perspective, whether that's from a cost perspective? Where do you see opportunity? There's obviously investors on this call and they're trying to understand that market. And you see a lot of these products on the retail side. Where do you see opportunity?
Yeah, well, touching on cheese, we just made an acquisition called the Future of Cheese Company because we did feel that there was room in that category specifically to bring a product to market that maybe addresses some of those concerns of how do you get a product that mimics cheese, where the existing brands that are out there were not doing potentially the best job in answering that question from a consumer perspective. But I think one of the biggest things, plant-based is well filtered throughout every category and every aisle, whether it's replacing a product or it's just inherently plant-based. But I think one thing where you're going to start to see is a lot of existing brands transition to plant-based, and that's, on the ingredient side and substitutions. So, I know I think it was Nestle just announced, the Kit Kat bar and kind of coming out with a vegan version. And that's taking an existing product and substituting out what was non-plant-based with a plant-based ingredient that suddenly made it vegan and captures and kind of caters to a new market. So I think, plant-based is well-versed in almost every category in the grocery store, whether you know it or not, and whether it's marketed that way or not. But I think you're going to start to see in the large CPG companies start to replace ingredients in products that were typically not catering to a vegan, vegetarian, and substituting ingredients out. So it's on the ingredient side that you'll start to see growth for existing products that are already produced.
Gus, do you want to chime in terms of, your company, you started for a very specific reason, but I think it's fair to say that your addressable market has been growing. How have you approached that product development process, and also from the top down, how do you see that?
Yeah, in terms of product development, it was in terms of the initial mission was, I want something that's healthy to be able to enjoy burgers. I love burgers, and it became quite extensible. Ultimately, we are a bakery company. We just use different ingredients in traditional bakery. So instead of using, grains, we use nuts and seeds. And so really the extensibility of the bakery space for us is quite large. And we're just keeping on the mission of, creating a positive effect in people's lives through what they choose to eat. And that's particularly in the bakery space. So when we talk about, tortillas, we love baking, and I love being able to make food, and people still like eating. So the big space for us that we're looking at, though, particularly, I guess it does cover plant-based. It's really in the allergen-free space. As we grow in restaurants that are seeing the vision of, hey, when I put whatever, like my burger or my toppings on an unbun-related product, it improves the healthiness, and reduces any kind of
within, and whether that's within your current, product category, or where you see certain ingredients that you want to continue to push your product portfolio towards.
What we really want to do is be innovative, like I said, with products that we can bring to the market that can serve as an ingredient in preparing meals, whether it be plant-based meat alternatives or otherwise. But it is about creating that home meal. And I kind of look at the grocery store. Historically, it was really built from the center out. So it started as a traditional grocery store with all shelf-stable products, then fresh departments were added to it. What we're facing right now, what we're seeing right now is quite the opposite, with plant-based products coming from the perimeter in. And I think that eventually you're going to see more and more plant-based products throughout the grocery store, but it's definitely right now around the perimeter of the store first. And then it'll start to flow in towards the center. And a good example of that, like Matt mentioned, whether it's Nestle with their chocolate bar or other products that may be coming to market. So it's plant-based doesn't stop just with meat alternatives.
Monica, I want to ask you a question, a little bit different, touching on that ratio and what sort of happened as this year has progressed with constant changes from our storefronts open, are they not, versus being able to go through online channels. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Well, for us, it's not really so much direct to consumer, so online versus retail. It really is both. So we really do consider ourselves to be an omni-channel brand. And because our product is not only ingestible, but it also arguably affects your health, either positively or negatively, people are somewhat prudent, and you often have to touch them more than once before they'll actually buy the product. So from my perspective, the more touch points we have with that consumer, the more often that person is in contact with our brand, the more likely they are to purchase it. So we really have an approach of getting the widest distribution possible. So we're available today in over 1,500 stores across Canada. We're also available online on our own website. As of recently, we started selling on Amazon. And we have a number of other online retailers such as well.ca. And so from our perspective, they all work together, because you may first see us on well.ca, then you'll go into a Rexall and you'll see us there. And then finally, you'll see an ad or something, and you'll eventually end up buying the product after many, many touch points. And so, our online business has grown quite a bit in the last year. It's quite amazing how well it's doing. But by the same token, the retail business is also growing, perhaps not at the same pace, but it is still growing. And so COVID has changed the ratio between how much we sell in retail and how much we sell online. But it hasn't really fundamentally changed the core of our business or our consumer, who still needs to have usually, a few contacts with us before the person actually moves on to a purchase. So just that those contacts are a little bit different today.
So I think we only have time for one more question, and maybe we'll let each of the panelists weigh in. So I'm curious what the most interesting piece of consumer feedback you've received that has fundamentally influenced your decision-making at the C-suite level. I'm not sure, Tony or Gus, maybe you want to start us off.
Oops. There we go. Lost you there for a minute. I would say the consumer feedback is really been around the demand, just the demand. There's interesting things the consumers have historically been doing with the traditional Zoglows products that we have, but they're talking about how they want to use these products in different ways, and that's what we have to listen to. Because really, innovation, I think, is going to be the key to this entire category. And you can only innovate with products that the consumer is looking for, so that you can fill that need and also that demand. So it is extremely important for us to continue to understand how we can best serve the consumer and, in turn, our customers.
Perfect. Yeah. So I think a very good example is during COVID. So, ultimately we sell our bakery products and pizza crust, things of that nature in the freezer. And so as viable as that is in grocery bricks and mortar, COVID really shifted the market and kind of the breakdown to a serious demand for online and direct to consumer, as well as Amazon, obviously just, taking off more than it already had. And that, in terms of a shift, we invested heavily in, 3PL partners and also packaging equipment that helped us extend the shelf life of certain products so that, we can ship them and still make it a profitable and a viable exercise. One of the issues with shelf stable, or rather one of the advantages of shelf stable, is you can send stuff in a box across Canada and not have to spend $50 or $60 on, let's say, a loaf of bread. When it's temperature controlled, you have to spend that much. So that is definitely, we heard loud and clear in terms of the demand in both Canada and the US, and we're launching on Amazon next month. We wanted to make sure we did it right, and we're launching our own store direct to consumer in the US and rolling out in Canada in Q3. So that's it.
Great. Monica, do you want to go next? Then maybe Matt, you can have the last word.
Sure. So I think the biggest learning from our perspective is actually relates to one of the videos that you sent around for us to watch before this talk, is that consumers don't always formulate exactly what they want, which is really interesting. Because when we launched, we had gone out and done all this market research, partly because of my background, which is in marketing. So we talked to a lot of consumers and we asked them what kind of products they wanted. And we launched with the SKUs that we thought would do the best. And they did well, but we recently launched a product that nobody asked for. This was 6 months ago. We launched a product called Bye Bloating, and it's just this crazy runaway hit, because guess what? People don't want to talk about their digestive issues and so on. And so I think one of the biggest learnings for me is, yes, you have to absolutely listen to your consumers, but you also have to try to figure out, that push-pull thing, what they may be wanting that they're not completely expressing. And as a marketer, that was actually a really tough lesson to learn, because that's not really how we're trained to think. So that's been really, really interesting for me.
Matt, do you want to go?
Yeah, I'll just add quickly, from a retailer perspective, unlike somebody who's creating a product, we see broad trends, happening daily, monthly, yearly. That's why we're constantly asked for what is going on at retail and what are we seeing. So I'm lucky in that standpoint that I see trends before maybe they're caught on by others and become a much larger industry than what they are. So I think from that perspective, as a retailer, we are listening to the consumer, and we're adjusting our offer in store to match what consumers are looking for. And then lastly, just this issue of online versus bricks and mortar. I think the one thing that it's taught us is grocery in terms of bricks and mortars is not going anywhere. Even at the peak of COVID, granted, as a percentage of growth, online definitely grew for us. But when we're talking about our overall revenue stream, you're talking about 8 or 10% of our sales is sold online. So the consumer is definitely speaking that the in-store experience is very, very valuable for them. They enjoy it. It's much different than other industries that have been affected by the adoption of online. But when it comes to food, it's very hard to replace picking your own avocados versus having somebody else pick it for you. So I think the consumer has spoken in what is the most dramatic of times in terms of lockdowns and shutdowns, that people want to shop in grocery in a bricks and mortar experience. Doesn't diminish the fact that as a retailer, we have to have an answer for online, but bricks and mortar is not going anywhere. So yeah. Great.
Well, I think that's a great capstone thought. I want to thank all of our panelists, and for any viewers, the TED Talk that Monica mentioned it's a TED Talk by Malcolm Gladwell, and it's on choice, happiness, and spaghetti sauce. And anyone that's bringing a product to market, of any kind, I definitely recommend checking it out. It's 20 minutes well spent. So without further ado, Barrington, I'll pass it back to you.
Thank you so much, and thank you to our audience. For we're almost there, and thank you, Mike, our moderator, director, global sales and business development, Enwave, and also check out his podcast, Food for Thought. As well, I'd like to thank our presenters, Matt Lurie, President and CEO, Organic Garage, Tony Morello, CEO, Zoglows Incredible Food Corps, Monica Ruffo, founder and CEO, Well Told, and Gus Klemos, co-founder and chief baking officer at Unbun. May you have continued success in expanding your businesses. Thank you to our attendees today. Go to the company websites, learn more about these companies. If you have a lead for them, connect with them. This series isn't just about the big companies, it's also about smaller ones. I noticed in the audience, we have Chelsea Hodge, founder and CEO of Blender Bites. We also have someone from the Plant Alliance of Alberta. So it's not just companies, but organizations that help support this industry. Coming up next, plant protein, financing and investing. We have Tom Cox, Senior Investment Advisor at Canaccord Genuity Wealth Management, Jeff German, Director of Retail Corporate Finance at Canaccord, Conrad Nest, shareholder at Boughton Law, and Patrick Morris, CEO, Director, Eat Beyond Global Holdings, Inc. And the moderator is Anna Sarin. Now, the thank yous. The list keeps growing and growing as we journey through this. We're not doing this alone. Scott Exner of MLT Aikens, Canada's leading ag food law firm. Brad Farquhar, CFO, Input Capital and Executive in Residence in Agribusiness at the Business Schools of the University of Regina. The Regina Economic Development. Glenn Fraser and Leanne Magilla of MNP. Pulse Canada. Protein Industries of Canada. Jim Harden of AVAC. Adrian Sakamoto, IR at Venture North Capital, Inc. Nicole Marchand from Snowcap. And of course, the CSE personalities, Mark Francis, Anil Mall, and Grace Padota. Don't forget to check out CSE TV and follow us on LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. Check out our specialty shows, Tech Tuesday, #Finance, Aftermarket, along with Newly Listed and the latest and greatest market update, brought to you by Anna Sarin and Bruce Campbell from Stonecastle every Friday. We'll see you shortly for session 3. Make sure you go into the lounge, check out the tables. Our speakers here I advise you to go to those tables, and you can continue the conversation until the next panel starts. Thank you, and see you soon.